What's up everybody, it's Ben from the Urbstead, and today I'm going to be doing part one of a two-part series where I answer questions about how to be a first-time gardener. These questions come from a friend of us here at the Urbstead who has said she is going to commit to creating the garden at their house this year. Now this is a really good list of questions for any beginner, and my hope is that if you stick around through this video and come back for the next, you will walk away with some answers that you have been looking for to start your own garden journey. Thank you guys for coming. Now let's get into it. Question 1. How many plants should a first-time gardener plant? Great question. And this really depends on how adventurous you want to be at the start of your gardening journey. For us, for Julia and I, we started our first garden at a rental house that we lived at more than 5 years ago with approximately 3 or 4 tomato plants, a couple Swiss chard, and some raspberry bushes. So maybe a total of 10 or 12 plants. We didn't end up getting a ton that year, and it was kind of in a rough spot for the house that we were in. But it's what we had, and we really wanted to try it out. What I would advise is that you pick a few plants, potentially a few different breeds of a plant that you really like to eat. Do those few breeds really well. Maybe only 2 or 3 plants per breed. So if you had, for instance, picked tomatoes, beans, and cucumbers, pick a couple different types of those, maybe 3 different tomatoes. Maybe you want a cherry tomato, maybe you want a stew tomato or a soup tomato, and maybe you want a beefsteak tomato. And then do maybe 1 or 2 plants of each breed. And if you do that for 3 different types of vegetables, you would come out with, anywhere between 12 and 30 plants. And it might sound a lot, and of course, depending on where you live and the size of a garden that you have, that will all affect how many you can start with. But if you start with that amount and you try to do those plants really well, taking care of them, looking after them, watching them daily to see if there's any changes like a bacteria growth or damage to the leaves, that would really set you up well for the coming years as you grow from that amount of plants. Question 2. How to protect your garden from wildlife. For us, you know that it's rats, deer, some squirrels, and a lot of cucumber beetle. How you address the pest or how you address wildlife is specific to the pests that you are facing. We've had some success with rat traps, and this year we're going to try things like cayenne pepper in the ground. And for deer, we have also had some success by interplanting a lot of really smelly herbs and other smells that we know deer do not like. Finally, with cucumber beetles, we did it a little too late, well, way too late, but we found that if we use yellow colored bowls, that attracts the cucumber beetle. And if we put some sort of substance like a liquid with soap in it in the bottom of that bowl, the cucumber beetles get trapped and they can't come back out. So that technique is something that we would try to do earlier this year to have greater effect. So my recommendation for wildlife is first, observation, finding what pests you have to deal with. Second, addressing each pest specifically, whether that's through sacrificial plants, specific traps, or some other means of physical barrier between your garden space and the wildlife itself. Also, a point to keep in mind with pests, the longer you wait to address the situation, the harder it will be to fix the situation. Question 3. Which plants are easy to care for a first-time gardener? I have 3 items on my list for this answer, and those are garlic, beans, and potatoes. Your mileage may vary on this one, but in our experience, garlic has been as easy as putting it in the ground the Halloween before, watering it semi-consistently at least, and then pulling out on July 4th some beautiful heads of garlic. Beans, almost just as easy. We throw stuff in the ground and without fail plants just burst from the ground and provide abundantly. Potatoes, we have yet to come into an issue with potatoes, but we've only done them once. This year we might struggle a little harder because we're going to have more quantity of potatoes. But, again, those have been the three easiest for us. Other plants that we know have been easy for other people include things like zucchini, squash, peas, and even peppers. Things like peas, what you have to remember is that you typically plant them into the ground earlier than you're expecting. And that is because they are cold weather crop. So they love that early spring where it's still chilly and they have no issues with frost. They're frost hardy. Of course, if it plummets, that's an issue. But the thing is, frost hardy plants can take a little bit of that frost. And with peas, as soon as the days start to warm up, that's when they're going to start to slow down their production. Now, zucchinis and squash, again, personally, we've had terrible luck with them, but that is because of the pests and our lack of prevention of those pests. But typically, the story you'll hear is you'll plant one zucchini plant and you just get buckets of zucchini. So, go for that. So to summarize, what are plants that are easy to grow for first-time gardeners? You got peas, potatoes, peppers, zucchini, squash, and garlic. Question 4. Is container gardening a good way to start a garden? My answer to this would be yes and no. Really, container gardening is about preference. It's about visuals, and perhaps it's about ease of access. If you struggle with bending down all the way to the ground and harvesting or working day in and day out in the ground level garden, I would say that a good mid-level height raised bed would help you address that. The idea with gardening is that you want it to be pleasurable. You want to enjoy getting out into the garden. So if that means getting off the ground a little bit, then do that. Also, the aesthetic side does weigh in some people's minds as well. As you've seen, we have both in-ground and raised bed. I personally love the look of our raised bed garden in the side yard. But at the same time, I like getting my hands down into the earth, onto the ground level, and working on the ground. To sum it up, if you want to do container gardening as a start, that's fine. Things you should look out for is moisture. Having a container garden, it is typically going to dry out faster than in the ground. On the other hand, container gardening typically also has less weeds because you're usually starting from scratch. So, pros and cons. Question number 5. How much time do I need to commit to a full season of gardening? Now, as you can guess, the amount of time that you need to commit to a season of gardening is directly proportional to A, the amount of plants that you plant, B, the type of harvest that you want to walk away with, and C, how much fun you have in the garden. Now, I'll give you one side of the example. If you've only planted 5 or 6 plants, maybe up to 10 plants, and if you're kind of not really worried about getting this big harvest, you don't need it, and really it's just for fun, and if you're not the type of person that really enjoys the garden as much, it's not going to take you much time. In fact, minimal time. A few hours a week or less. Now, on the other side of that spectrum, if you went, maybe the full 30 plants on your first time garden or something like that, and say that you want to walk out with your summer groceries paid for, basically. At the end of summer, you don't want to be going to the grocery store for vegetables anymore. And also, you just adore being in the garden, getting your hands dirty, spending time working. It's going to be a long summer or growing season, and that's okay. So, maybe 4, 5, 6 hours a week, maybe more. The thing is, there's also time to be spent in the garden on the off season. So, to get a whole picture, say early spring, you plant your stuff You plant your plants into the ground, whether you're sowing seed or seedlings, or you sprouted seeds yourself. You take it all the way through early spring, and your watering in that time frame is less than what it will be later on in the season. Your plants are smaller, they have less requirements, and typically the ground is more moist because of more frequent rain. Then comes summer and midsummer. Again, you're still going to have a little bit more rain than usual, or than you will later on, but you're going to be watering a lot more. Your plants are bigger. The weather is hotter. Evaporation is more. Now, things are going to start to be picked and harvested and eaten around this time period. Even late spring, there's some items that get picked and harvested. But then end of summer comes along, you're doing a lot of harvesting. You're also doing a lot of watering. A lot. For us, at least. And then finally, fall time, again, you're finishing up the harvest. Sometimes you're stopping watering some plants because you're ready for them to just die off. But some plants are just now starting into getting heavy water. If you do things like succession planting, you're going to have that early spring to early summer crop that you're probably going to pull up. You're going to plant another set. You're going to keep planting, potentially every 2 weeks, some crops in succession. So you could be looking at early spring to late fall. You're picking, you're planting, you're harvesting, and you're watering in that whole time frame. Even at the end of the season, there's still stuff that you can be doing. Like I said, garlic goes in the ground on Halloween, so October 30th. Also, there is preparation to be done for the next year. Now, you could go out, you could buy all your seedlings from a store, you could buy all your soil in bags, whether it's, Miracle-Gro stuff or like organic soil compost, really full of microorganisms. It's going to be expensive, but you can do it. And you can trim the sides of your planting season pretty tightly so that you're only really affected time-wise in that mid-spring to mid-fall. Now, if you want to do things all on your own, like we're trying to do, you start working on preparing the ground at the end of fall, mid to end fall, for the next year. So you're planting cover crop, you're doing a deep till if that's something that you do in your yard, you are maybe putting down some ground cover to kill off the years before weeds or otherwise to create a new bed in the spring. And really you're trying to pack a ton of carbon into that soil so that over the winter all the ground can kind of marry and get happy and be really ready for the next year's crop. You're also starting to start seeds inside, maybe even in January like we did. And so you can see that there's a sliding scale. You can commit a ton of time to the garden, or you can commit very little. And usually your product is commensurate with the time that you spend. As with most of life, I guess. Thank you guys for stopping by the garden here at the Urbstead. I'm Ben. Let me know in the comments down below if you found any of these questions and answers to be helpful for your situation in your own gardening journey. If you have other questions that you would like me to walk through and answer or research on for you, leave them in the comments below as well. We appreciate if you liked this video and the content in it to leave a like and subscribe. Make sure you come back next week to see the conclusion of this two-part series where I finish out going through the questions that we were posed on how to start your first-time garden. Thanks again, and as always, grow on!